Methods of data collection. Questionnaire. Introduction. Questionnaires usually form an integral part of descriptive and opinion-related surveys. Questionnaires can either be in the form of a self-administered questionnaire, that is, where the respondent is requested to complete the questionnaire in his or her own time, or in the form of a structured interview, where the interviewer, very often the researcher, writes down the answers of the respondents during the telephone or face-to-face interview. Irrespective of which method is used, the formulation of the questions and the structure of the questionnaire are critical to the success of the survey. This document focuses on the issues involved in the design of a structured questionnaire. What is a questionnaire method? A questionnaire is a list of written questions that can be completed in one of two basic ways. Firstly, the respondents could be asked to complete the questionnaire with the researcher not present. This is a postal questionnaire and loosely refers to any questionnaire that a respondent completes without the aid of the researcher. Secondly, respondents could be asked to complete the questionnaire by verbally responding to questions in the presence of the researcher. This variation is called a structured interview. Although the two variations are similar, a postal questionnaire and a structured interview could contain exactly the same questions. The difference between them is important. If, for example, we are concerned with protecting the respondent's anonymity, then it might be more appropriate to use a postal questionnaire than a structured interview. Questionnaires are restricted to two basic types of questions. Closed-ended. Closed-ended is a question for which a researcher provides a suitable list of responses. Example, yes or no. This produces mainly quantitative data. Open-ended. Open-ended is a question where the researcher doesn't provide the respondent with a set of answers from which to choose. Rather, the respondent is asked to answer in their own words. This produces mainly qualitative data. Strengths of questionnaire method. The researcher is able to contact large number of people quickly, easily and efficiently using a postal questionnaire, since all or she has to do is identify the group that will be targeted and post them the list of questions. Questionnaires are relatively quick and easy to create, code and interpret, especially if closed questions are used. In addition, the respondent, not the researcher, does the time-consuming part of completing the questionnaire. A questionnaire is easy to standardize. For example, every respondent is asked the same question in the same way. The researcher, therefore, can be sure that everyone in the sample answers exactly the same questions, which makes them a very reliable method of research. The questionnaires can be used to explore potentially embarrassing areas, such as sexual and criminal matters, more easily than other methods. The questionnaire can, for example, be both anonymous and completed in privacy. This increases the chances of people answering questions honestly because they are not intimidated by the presence of a researcher. Weaknesses of questionnaire method. The format of questionnaire design makes it difficult for the researcher to examine complex issues and opinions. Even where open-ended questions are used, the depth of answers that the respondent can provide tend to be more limited than with almost any other method of research. This makes it difficult for a researcher to gather information that is rich in depth and detail. With a postal questionnaire, the researcher can never be certain the person to whom the questionnaire is sent actually fills it in. For example, if your research is concerned with finding out the opinions of a woman on a range of issues, it would be less than useful if an unknown number of questionnaires sent by the researchers were filled in by men. Where the researcher is not present, it is always difficult to know whether or not a respondent has understood a question properly. The researcher has to hope that the questions asked mean the same to all the respondents as they do to the researcher. This is a problem that can, to some extent, be avoided by conducting a pilot study prior to conducting the real survey. The response rate, that is the number of questionnaires that are actually returned to the researcher, tends to be very low for postal questionnaires. A 20 to 25% return of questionnaires is probably something that most researchers would happily settle for, and this may mean that a carefully designed sample becomes unrepresentative of a target population. The problem of the self-selecting sample is particularly apparent in relation to questionnaires. When a response rate is very low, the responses received may not be the opinions of a very highly motivated section of the sample. That is, people with strong opinions who take the time and trouble to complete and return a questionnaire. Step to designing a questionnaire. Let us now look at various steps we need to follow to design an effective questionnaire. Formulate the research questions and research objectives or goals. What do you wish to ascertain? Provide a clear, concise formulation of research questions, that is, what do you wish to ascertain and why. Specify clear and unambiguous goals for the intended study. Define the target population. Who do you wish to target? Provide a clear, concise, and unambiguous formulation of who the target population is, that is, who the intended study is aimed at. A clear description of the target population allows the researcher to ask relevant background questions and to formulate the questions in such a way that it is understood by the respondents. Formulate the questions in order to answer the research questions. List all the information needed to be able to answer all the research questions. Scrutinize the existing body of knowledge. Example, available questionnaires or articles regarding similar studies in order to select questions that are relevant for your purposes. Adapt and refine the available questions. Formulate your own answers where necessary. Decide on the appropriate level of measurement for each question. Determine the appropriate statistical technique to be used. Organize the questions. Questions should be organized in a logical order. Example, background questions in the same section, opinion-related questions dealing with the same topic in a separate section, etc. It is often a good idea to start with a question that is non-threatening yet interesting to the respondent. Consult experts once you have a first draft of the questionnaire. Consult experts in the specific field of study to ascertain their opinion whether you have addressed all relevant issues and formulated the questions in an understandable, unambiguous way. Consult an expert in questionnaire design to assist with the formulation of the questions and the response format. Do a pilot study among a small group of respondents similar to those in the target population. A pilot study is imperative in any study since it enables the researcher to identify and rectify problems prior to the survey being conducted, provides an indication of the response rate that can be expected. Adhere to ethical standards. The rights of respondents as human beings should be respected at all times. It implies that the decision to take part in a survey by completing the questionnaire remains the choice of the respondent. A respondent should be given the option to withdraw from the study at any time. A respondent cannot be coerced into providing information, especially not information that may be perceived as sensitive or incriminating. Respondents should be given the assurance that their responses will remain anonymous and that the information they provide will be treated as confidential at all times. Types of questions. The types of questions to be asked are directly related to the information the researcher requires. Questionnaire usually consists of a combination of the following types of questions. Factual questions. Factual questions mostly relate to facts about a respondent's demography, habits or hobbies, but can also test a respondent's knowledge on a particular subject. Example, how much money did you spend on clothes last year? Remember that respondents are notoriously unreliable about issues such as income. It is therefore better to ask income categories rather than exact income. Opinion related questions. Opinion related questions refers to the questions that reveal respondents' attitudes or perceptions or their perception of the frequency of a particular behavior. The questions in section C of the example questionnaire are opinion related questions. One should avoid asking respondents to provide information about someone else's opinions. It is often a good idea to assess the respondent's knowledge about an issue before asking him or her to express an opinion, as people often base their opinions on inaccurate factual knowledge. Threatening or sensitive and non-threatening or non-sensitive questions. Threatening or sensitive questions relate to sexual behavior, illegal activities, mental health, alcohol and drug abuse, deviant behavior or controversial public issues. These questions should preferably be avoided as it tends to have a negative impact on response rate, and in addition, respondents tend to give socially acceptable answers to questionnaire rather than the true answer. If you cannot avoid asking a question that may be perceived as threatening or sensitive, position the question towards the end of the questionnaire. Open questions. With open-ended questions, no pre-coded answers, that is, response categories, are provided. These questions are particularly useful when it is important to avoid influencing respondents by providing a list of possible answers to choose from. For example, reasons for a particular behavior or an opinion. Open-ended questions have certain disadvantages. Open questions can only be coded after the survey has been conducted and are thus time-consuming. An open-ended question often yields unusable information due to the fact that the respondent does not understand the question. The respondent should have the necessary skills to record his or own responses. That is, the respondent should be able to write down a response. Semi-literate respondents are those who have difficulty expressing their thoughts and ideas, often avoid answering open questions. Open-ended questions should therefore be avoided circumspectly and only when absolutely necessary. Closed questions. Closed questions are often referred to as multiple choice questions. Response categories are provided and respondents only need to select a particular answer or answers. These are especially useful to indicate the level of detail one expects the respondent to provide. Example, when one asks about religious affiliation, for example, the response categories can be broad categories such as Christian, Hindu, Jewish, Muslim, etc. Or they can indicate particular groupings within the various religions such as Protestant, Catholic, etc. The extent of detail required is then clear from the response alternatives provided. When formulating closed questions, keep the following in mind. Each question should contain clear instructions as to how to fill it in. That is, tell the respondent when the question requires only one answer and when more than one answers may be given. Make sure that all possible answers or alternatives are provided. That is, the response alternative should be exhaustive. Use other. Please specify if you are not unsure. If only one answer or alternative is to be marked, the alternative should not overlap. That is, the alternative should be mutually exclusive. If the possibility exists that a question does not apply to a respondent, include not applicable as one of the alternatives. Skip branching or contingency questions. This kind of question is used when a set of questions is only applicable to a subgroup of respondents. Branching questions should be used with care as respondents and sometimes researchers can easily get confused, which may result in a loss of information. It is therefore essential to give clear, unambiguous instructions. Question wording. The wording of every question is of the utmost importance. Let us now look at how a good question should satisfy few criteria. The question should be short, simple, and to the point. This implies, amongst others, the double-barreled questions, that is, a single question addressing more than one issue should be avoided. Example of a double-barreled question. Do you believe employment equity training should be linked to the availability of present posts and future vacancies as a result of natural attrition at your company? A short and simple question should not contain jargon, slang, or abbreviations. The question should be clear and unambiguous. There should be no room for misunderstanding on the part of the respondent as to the meaning of the question. The researcher should also understand the answer in the same way meant by the respondent. Example of an ambiguous question: how many family members do you have? The word family means different things to different people. The question should have a clear instruction. Example of a question without a clear instruction: here is a question that does not contain a clear instruction as to how to answer it. What brand of computer do you own? Dell, Mercer, Apple, others. The respondent is not told whether only one or more than one option should be marked. The question should not contain double negatives. This occurs when respondents are asked whether they agree or disagree with a negative statement. If they disagree with the statement, they are expressing a double negative because they disagree with not doing or believing something. Example of a double negative: do you agree or disagree with the following statement? I do not feel threatened by the employment equity process at my company. Respondents should be asked to express opinions about their own views, not what they think somebody else thinks. Researchers sometimes draw conclusions about the views of respondents when they were asked to express an opinion about someone else's views. This only results in unreliable and incorrect information. Therefore, conclusions cannot be drawn about other people's views on the basis of what respondent believes these views are. Example of a question where the views of others are required: do you think men are more positive about women's abilities as equals than was the case in the past? The question should be phrased neutrally. Questions that contain value judgments or give the respondents an indication of what the socially desirable answer is are called leading questions. These should be avoided as respondents have a tendency to give researchers the answers they think the researchers expect. Example of a leading question: has your company acted in a responsible manner by implementing an HIV/AIDS policy? The question should not contain emotional language. One should avoid using words with emotional connotations when formulating a question, as respondents would tend to react to the emotional connotation rather than the issue. Example of an emotive question: under what circumstances would you agree to murdering babies by allowing the mothers to have an abortion? The question should not make the respondent feel guilty. If respondents feel that they are implicating themselves by answering a question truthfully, they will tend to lie. Example of a question that may make a respondent feel guilty: how often have you cheated on your tax returns in the past 5 years? The question should not have prestige bias. If a particular opinion is linked to a person with high status in the community, it influences the respondent's reply. If respondents respect the high status person, they will tend to assume that he or she must be right and will reply accordingly. Example is: President Becky believes that HIV does not cause AIDS. Do you agree? The question should accommodate all the possible answers. The response alternative should be exhaustive. If one is unsure whether all possibilities have been provided, it is important to include an option stating other. If a substantial number of respondents choose a particular alternative, this can be coded after the questionnaires are received back. Example: what is your religious affiliation? Christian, Hindu, Jewish. What should respondents who are Muslim or do not have a religious affiliation reply here? The response alternative should be mutually exclusive. Response categories should not overlap or be unbalanced. Only one response alternative should be applicable to a particular respondent. Example of a question where the response alternatives are not mutually exclusive: what is your age group in full years? 18 to 25, 25 to 35, 35 to 45, 45 or older. A person who is 25 years old can mark more than one option. The question should not make assumptions. A question should not begin with a premise and then ask questions based on the premise. Example of a question where an assumption is made. Are you satisfied with your current short-term insurance? Yes or no? The assumption here is that all the respondents have short-term insurance. The question should not ask about hypothetical situations. Respondents tend to answer explicit, tangible questions about topics that relate to their experiences much more reliably than abstract hypothetical questions. The latter type of question expects of respondents to consider what they would do or think they should they find themselves in a hypothetical situation. The majority of respondents find this very difficult to do. Example of an hypothetical question. What would you do if your 15-year-old daughter fell pregnant? The structure of a questionnaire. Question order, length of the questionnaire, format and layout, the cover letter. Question order. Questions should be grouped in logical groups that relate to a particular topic. A questionnaire should be viewed as a conversation and hence should have a certain logical order. It is therefore important to exhaust a particular topic before the next one is introduced. The more general questions about a particular topic should be asked first, followed by the more specific questions, thereby creating a funnel effect. Questions dealing with biographical information are all usually placed at the beginning of a questionnaire, since they deal with factual information and are generally perceived to be non-threatening. Transitions between questions should be smooth. One should avoid structuring the questionnaire in such a way that a response pattern develops where respondents answer all the questions in a particular way without reading the questions properly. Length of the questionnaire. Response rate is often inversely proportional to the length of the questionnaire. That is, the longer the question, the lower the response rate tends to be. The length of a questionnaire depends on the survey format and the characteristics of the respondents. As a rule of thumb, it should take no longer than 30 to 45 minutes to complete a face-to-face, that is a personal interview. 15 to 20 minutes to complete a self-administered questionnaire and 5 to 8 minutes to complete a telephone interview. Format and layout. The following should be taken into account as far as physical appearance of the questionnaire is concerned. The font size should not be too small. Choose a style that is easy to read, such as Arial 11 or 12. The layout should not be cramped to avoid respondents missing a question. With regard to paper size, A4 or A5 is preferable. If the questionnaire is printed on both sides of a paper to avoid cost, it should be crammed to read like a book. If it is crammed in the upper left-hand corner, there is a danger the respondents might miss the questions on the back page. The cover letter. The cover letter is a researcher's last chance to elicit a response. It is important to provide a well-written cover letter that provides the following information. Why is the study being conducted? Who is doing the study? Why is it important to respond? How long will it take to complete the questionnaire? How and when should the questionnaire be returned? What are the contact details of the researcher? Whether his or her responses will be treated confidentially, that is, ensure the respondent of anonymity. This module addressed the planning and design of standardized questionnaires. A formal standardized questionnaire is a survey instrument used to collect data from individuals about themselves or about a social unit such as a household or a school. A questionnaire is thus said to be standardized when each respondent is to be exposed to the same questions and the same system of coding responses. The aim here is to try to ensure that differences in response to questions can be interpreted as reflecting differences among respondents rather than differences in the processes that produce the answers.